Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. Good day so far? How are the sessions? Everybody enjoying them? Excellent. My name is Jason Modest. I'm the head of the Manufacturing and Science and Technology team at Millipore-Sigma. Millipore-Sigma is the sponsor for today's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion presentation with Beth Ridley. As part of the Wisconsin BioHealth industry and with more than 25 years of experience with a wide range of high-quality chemical and biochemical products, Millipore is proud to be a member of BioForward and support the Wisconsin BioHealth Summit in the position of our position in the industry and within the region. I'm excited to introduce the session on behalf of Millipore-Sigma. A little bit about our presenter. Beth Ridley is a former corporate executive turned entrepreneur, speaker, and leadership inspirer. She combines 25 years of corporate leadership and management consulting experience in diversity and inclusion in positive psychology to partner with leaders to transform workplace cultures and to better achieve the vision and goals of those organizations. She's the owner and founder of A Brimful Life and will talk to us about building a culture of belonging and putting DEI principles into practice. You're welcome to read more about her bio through the Wisconsin BioHealth Summit website and certainly by scanning the QR session code. With that, enjoy the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right, thumbs up if you are loving this summit. Yeah, okay, I don't even work in biohealth, and I gotta tell you, I've been so inspired. I took so many notes of things that I took away from the sessions this morning, and to me, there's like some themes that really came across, and what I heard is that there's been so many advances in technology and research. It's really opening up so many opportunities for you to have tremendous impact in your companies and in the industry, and I think even more importantly in the community, especially in medically vulnerable communities, and ultimately to impact individual human lives. Like, kind of a big deal. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I was really inspired. And what I also loved is every session that I went to this morning, they weaved in and talked about the importance of diversity and inclusion as being enablers for you to achieve all the things that you want to achieve. So I was really pleased about that. So what I want to do in this session is just help you connect those dots even a little bit more, right? And really see how diversity, equity, inclusion will enable you to think big and act big so you can rise to the occasion of the opportunities that are in front of you. And it really all comes down to embracing and thinking about diversity as an asset and just being more intentional about approaching your daily interactions with others and your daily decision-making with more of an inclusive mindset. And when you can do that, you're going to be in a position to uncover and harness new ideas to really lay the foundation for creativity and innovation, which you need to think big, and also to develop new relationships and partnerships, maybe strengthen existing relationships, and certainly recruit and retain the talent that everyone needs in order to act big. So I really want to just kind of reintroduce you to diversity, equity, inclusion, maybe help you see it in a little bit of a different light. And that these principles are not just things that are good to do, they're really smart to do from a business standpoint. And I also want to just simplify and demystify diversity, equity, inclusion. We throw these words out a lot, like what do they actually mean? How do they come together to add value? And then lastly, in my opinion, the ability to be someone to not just manage or deal with differences and the diversity that's all around us, but to really harness it and to be able to bridge across differences, to bring out the best in everyone, that's leadership. That is just basic fundamental leadership. And the fact that we have so much diversity all around us, everywhere, every day, To me, being able to do that and bring diversity, equity, inclusion principles to life is a #1 leadership competency for 2021 and beyond. So I want to make sure that you leave this session with some really easy, practical things that you can do right away when you get back to your workplaces tomorrow to put into practice to be more of that leader that can, again, bring out the best in everyone and lay that foundation to think big and act big. So that's what we're going to talk about. Also, I am sprinkling in some discussion questions so that we keep it interactive. I'll save time for questions at the end, and I'm going to do all that in 50 minutes, so pray for me. All right, so let's jump to it. So I just like to start with the end in mind, right? So diversity, equity, inclusion. I'll get to exactly what I mean by those words, but at the end of the day, those 3 words combine to create a culture of belonging. And a culture of belonging means that everyone in the workplace feels valued and respected for who they are. They feel safe and supported being who they are. So you might have heard terms like psychological safety. So psychological safety, feeling valued and respected, that's all belonging. And that matters because when people feel more comfortable being who they are, they engage more in work. They're less worried about how to fit in. And that means that they're going to contribute more honestly, authentically, tap into all of their life experiences and their skill set. And it also means that they're not afraid of standing out and maybe speaking up and taking risks out of fear of retribution. So when people are more comfortable being themselves at work, they're simply going to contribute and engage more authentically. And when they do that, you're going to get more ideas on the table. You're going to be able to look at challenges and opportunities from multiple perspectives. And that's going to lead to more thoughtful decision making. More thoughtful decision making usually leads to better business outcomes. And then when you're an organization that is achieving what you've set out to achieve, but the manner in which you're doing it, how you're achieving the results, people feel good. They feel like they have fully contributed. That definitely enables you to recruit talent from broad and diverse candidate pools and retain them. So a culture of belonging really does create this virtuous cycle. That's good for business. The other thing that's really important to understand is that belonging benefits everyone at work. So I think a lot of times when people hear diversity, equity, inclusion, they think, oh, that's addressing certain people at work, maybe around gender or people of color. But everyone benefits from belonging. Because when we think about diversity, we're talking about all the dimensions of diversity that make any one human unique. And the research shows that 60% of employees at work do not feel that they can fully be themselves at work, that they have to work a little extra hard to fit in, or they have to edit some part of themselves because they don't feel comfortable bringing that forward at work. And so what ends up happening is that they're more worried about that, more worried about not standing out, that they're not fully engaged or fully contributing. And that's not 60% of women or 60% of people of color, that's 60% of humans. So think about that untapped opportunity at work that is already not being maximized. And out of that 60%, depending on the degree that someone is holding back, that can lead to a lot of stress and anxiety. And then once it gets really bad, it also leads to people leaving the organization. So belonging matters very much at an individual level. But collectively, right, if you think about all the individuals that make up the culture and to what degree are they experiencing belonging or not, when individuals in an organization really do feel a sense of belonging, collectively it adds up to tangible business results. So there's been enough data collected now over about a decade or so of organizations that have diversity but also a culture of belonging really do outperform those organizations that do not. So like I said, this has been quantified. So diverse and inclusive cultures lead to better decisions, more creativity, more innovation. That's been quantified. Better decisions lead to better business outcomes, whether that be financial success or reputational success. That's been quantified. And then certainly all of that gives you a better return on your investment when it comes to recruiting and retaining talent, which is like a big deal these days. So a lot of people ask me, there's so much talk about diversity, equity, inclusion recently. Is this just sort of like, management, leadership topics du jour? Is it more of a moment, or is it more of a movement? Like, how sustainable is this? And I will say that even though there's been a lot of talk about diversity, equity, inclusion lately, it has been an evolution within corporate America really for over 30 years. So I want to go back a little bit and just sort of like bring you along with the evolution of diversity, equity, inclusion and how we got to this point. So I'm old enough to remember, like 25 years ago or so when I first entered the workforce, there was really only diversity that people were talking about. And not necessarily in like an embracing, it's an asset way. It's more like, be careful. And you would go to HR and they would show you the video of like, what not to say when it comes to gender diversity or race diversity, so that you don't get in trouble or the company doesn't get sued. So that's what I remember. Then maybe like a decade later, there's always like a new word that's added to the mix. And then inclusion was on the scene, right? And inclusion was more like, no, diversity is not bad. We want to celebrate our differences. And so, companies started like celebrating different cultural traditions and ethnic holidays. You would bring in food from, people's different backgrounds, one day during lunch. A lot of employee resource groups started. And that was an evolution. It was better, but it made diversity almost extracurricular, right? You do it over here on the side. It wasn't core to business. So then fast forward another 10 years, a couple years ago, equity's on the scene. Like, what is this equity all about? And equity really started to bring diversity into and make it a value to the core business. So that sort of brings us to like where we are now. And I would say, it's really been like over the past year and a half, 17 months, where companies are really starting to rethink and dust off their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. And a couple things that I'm seeing in the marketplace that is causing this new, renewed interest in it. So some of those things are in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. Employees really decided that social justice issues, racial equality issues were very important to them, and they wanted to work for a company where they stood behind these values more than just statements and words, and that they used the influence of the organization to make change in the community, but also to look inward at the organization. So I had a lot of CEOs come to me and say, we want to do more about diversity, equity, and inclusion because their employees were demanding it. So employees were kind of like leading the charge within companies. The other thing that happened was just because of the pandemic, leaders started to lead through crisis differently. Employees were scared, and so leaders had to show up with more empathy at work. Started to see employees as more than employees, as full people, asking how people are really doing. How's your family doing? And then with virtual, we get to see people in their natural habitat. And, we see kids and cats in the background, and we realize, like, oh, my coworker is like a full person. So I think seeing people for the richness of who they really are and leading with empathy is definitely rooted in diversity, equity, inclusion. And employees responded overall very well to this new form of leadership. Most employees will say they were really pleased with how their boss, their manager, their companies handled things during the crisis. So there's really no going back now. Leaders saw that bringing more empathy into the workplace benefited them and others. So I think leaders are leading in a new way. Also, there's just new diversity in the workplace. So we've got 4 generations now in the workplace, right? So Gen Zers are entering the workplace, and they're crazy. I'm just going to tell you. I have so many millennial CEOs coming to say, oh my God, you got to help us bridge the differences with these generations. And I just laugh because I'm Gen X, and all we did was complain about millennials. Oh, they've got bad work habit, and they just always want a reward and a cookie. And so I always say the millennials, you can tell you're getting old when you're complaining about the next generation. But we do. We've got 4 generations in the workplace. I think mental health, emotional well-being is now being talked about at work way more than ever before. And people speaking up and saying what they need to be mentally and emotionally healthy at work. Also, working style preferences, right? People realize they work way better virtually. Some people realize they work way better in person. Now we've got that diversity in the workplace to sort out. And then, so diversity, I think, is going away. But again, those leaders who cannot see diversity as a problem, or how do I just deal with it, but how do I harness it as an asset is, I think, a new trend. And then finally, I'll say, I mean, this came across loud and clear with the sessions that I was in this morning. You can't find the people that you need to achieve the growth that you want. It is a competitive labor market out there for top talent. And so companies are realizing their culture is going to be the differentiator. Employees care about things more than just salary and benefits. And so for those companies that can create that culture of belonging, they're at an advantage in this very competitive labor market. So all of that has been happening over the past 1.5 years. It's really created this like perfect storm of all these things coming together where companies are doubling down on diversity inclusion. And I definitely see, from my vantage point, it is not a topic du jour. It is not a moment. It is an evolution, and the companies that are doing it right are really starting to see diversity, equity, inclusion not as an initiative, not as a separate strategic plan, not as setting up a DEI council, but integrating it into the way they do business, into everything that they do. And to me, that means they set the expectation that everyone in the organization approaches their interactions and their decision-making with a DEI mindset. So I want to talk about like how to get there. Some simple steps that you can do to start integrating DEI into your organizations, and again, to build that foundation so you can think big and act big. But my first question for all of you, and we'll just do this one by a show of hands, how many of you, your organizations, have an intentional focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Just by show of hands. Ooh, yeah, quite a few. And for those who raised your hand, how many of you have like a chief diversity and inclusion officer or a DEI council or committee? Okay, so about half. Then I would say a couple of things. If you don't have anything in place, don't worry. The way that I approach diversity, equity, and inclusion, and again, to me, it needs to be diffused to everyone, and it's more of a mindset. You actually don't need a big initiative or a big strategy to make progress. And if you do have an owner of DEI or a council or committee in place, I would also say just listen with an open mind of what I'm sharing today, because in my experience, having led DEI for a very large Fortune 100 company, the bigger the team you have, the more people in the organization say they're going to take care of it. And it's harder to get it integrated into the culture as a mindset for everybody to embrace. So I think when you think about it as simple things that everyone can do that's relevant to them personally, relevant to them being good at their day job, that's how you get it ingrained in the culture. It can't be owned by any one entity. It has to be made relevant to everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. And the first step in how to do that is to really just simplify what we mean about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Make it simple, make it approachable to people. And the first step is I'll give you my simple definition of diversity. It's the differences that make a difference. and to recognize and to take a very broad and inclusive lens when we talk about diversity. We're talking about all differences that make each of us unique. So I think a lot of times we start and stop with the visible dimensions of diversity. And a couple things happen when you do that. First of all, you box people in, right? Everybody is more than the wrapper that they come in. And no one wants to be defined only by the visible dimensions of diversity, right? So I will say for myself, as an African American female, my race and my gender are hugely important to me. But I would argue like the least interesting things about me. I want you to get to know the full me, right? And I think everyone can relate to that. The other thing is, by taking a broad look at diversity and talking about diverse life experiences and backgrounds and skill set and personality types, people who look around their organization and say, oh, we don't really have any diversity, you're overlooking all the hidden dimensions of diversity that are really rich and are probably going untapped. And I think when people look around and be like, we all look the same, we're all the same race or gender, the only way to solve diversity, equity, and inclusion is to hire people that don't look like us. You know, you run into the danger of you bring them in and not in a culture of belonging. You're not going to get that return on your investment of recruiting diverse talent, however you define that. So there is always more diversity than meets the eye. So practice harnessing the hidden dimensions of diversity. So when you do bring in people into the culture that actually look different in obvious ways, they're already stepping into an organization where you're flexing these muscles to build a culture of belonging. And then third, the benefit of taking an inclusive approach to diversity and looking at all dimensions of diversity, more people in your organization can start to see how it benefits them. And again, then you'll have more ambassadors and more people engaging. A simple example, the large corporation that I had worked at last, a dimension of diversity that often got overlooked was about, introverts and extroverts. And in that organization, it seemed like the extroverts were the ones who always rose to the top, to leadership positions, and so they tended to hire and recruit people that were more like them, thinking that, leadership comes in a package of someone who can, speak up and give public talks and stuff like that, or not hold back in meetings. And so the dimension of diversity that was not feeling that sense of belonging were the introverts. And they really are struggling to say, like, how can I grow my career? How can I contribute, but in a way where it's not causing me a ton of stress and anxiety, and they were being overlooked. So really dig deeper and look at the many dimensions of diversity that you need to do a better job of valuing, respecting, and harnessing to foster a culture of belonging. So if diversity is the mix, inclusion means getting the mix to work well together by making sure that you're valuing and respecting all the many dimensions of diversity. Inclusion is not a natural byproduct of having diversity. Inclusion requires some degree of intentionality. Because at the end of the day, the workplace culture is a result of your intentional actions, but often your unintentional actions. And when you're unintentional about creating a culture of belonging, you could end up with exclusion or tolerance. Very seldom intentionally do people want to end up with a culture of exclusion or tolerance, but it happens. So exclusion happens when you're unintentional about fostering inclusion. And what ends up happening is you either overlook or you're dismissive of diversity, or you see it, but you're sort of judgmental towards it, right? So this shows up a lot when you're, like examples of team building and team bonding and how teams socialize, right? So there's sort of the standard happy hour, right? So I always go to happy hour and never really gave thought to the people that have caregiving responsibilities after work. Oh, well, you can't make it. That unintentionally creates a culture of exclusion. And again, most people aren't intentional about excluding, but it happens. Also, if you're unintentional, you might end up with a culture of tolerance, which is not bad. It's not toxic. It's just that it could be better. So tolerance is basically when you recognize the differences, and you try to be welcoming, but at the end of the day, you sort of default to what is most common among the work group. Team building example would be, oh, we know that this individual has caregiving responsibilities after work. We will start happy hour an hour early, so join for the time that you can. Acknowledge the differences, welcome the person in, but we all know the real fun happens late in the evening, right, after that person's gone home. So unintentionally, you created just a culture of tolerance. To get to belonging, it just requires being a little thoughtful. Doesn't require necessarily more money or big initiatives, but just to be a little bit thoughtful. And so to get to a culture of belonging, you would, for that happy hour example, maybe you go around the team and ask everyone, what could be something that we could do to accomplish our goal around team bonding that is in alignment with your life circumstances? And you'll probably get a lot of different ideas. Everybody feels that their needs were thought of, they had the opportunity to contribute, and frankly, maybe you come up with a better outcome because you end up doing more fun or interesting things as a team. So it didn't require any money, didn't require that much effort, it just required intentional thought. So that's inclusion. So the last term I'm just going to give you my simple definition for is equity. And so this is the one that sometimes causes confusion. So equity is about getting everyone what they need to succeed based on where they are and where they want to go. Equity is not equality. Equality tries to promote fairness by giving everyone the same thing. But it falls short because people have different circumstances, therefore they need different things. So equity takes into consideration, in order for someone to succeed, we have to recognize that everyone's different, they're going to have different needs. So equity actually gets to fairness because it helps to level the playing field. Now, I like to point out that we practice equity intuitively in so many facets of our life. So taking a group photo, for example. Whenever we get ready to take a group picture, we always say, smaller people in the front, right? Because we know tall people have a height advantage when it comes to taking pictures. They're more likely to be seen. So we've recognized we're different in terms of height. We had to make an effort. Small people got up, got to the front. Tall people got to the back, maybe crouched down. So it required intentionality and effort. But the end result, a picture where everyone could be seen, was worth it. So I like to say the juice is worth the squeeze when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. It takes a little bit of effort and intentionality. The outcome is always better. Okay, so those are my 3 quick, simple, simplified definitions to first get everyone to see how these principles benefit them personally, how you connect to it, which is the first step in terms of integrating it fully into the workplace culture. So what I want to do now is give all of you the opportunity to just internalize this a little bit for yourself. And I have a question. We'll just take 1 minute, right, for you to turn to the person next to you, or in small groups of 3, and just reflect of all the many dimensions of diversity that make you unique, right? What is beneath your surface? So what is something unique about you that people would be surprised to learn if they got to know you a little bit better? So literally take 1 minute, one person share for 30 seconds, somebody else share. If you're not sitting next to anyone that you know, this is the time to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, and get out of your comfort zone and introduce yourself to someone new. And if you really still don't have anyone, come to the stage and you'll be my partner, okay? So literally 1 minute. What's something unique about you that people would be surprised to learn? Okay. All right, sorry to cut the conversation short. But I understand that you still have networking time this afternoon, so maybe you can pick up from where you left off. All right, I just wanted you to start to internalize these concepts for you personally. So putting it all together, right, diversity, inclusion, and equity. I'm going to give you like a simple way to think about how you really need these three things to create a culture of belonging. So I like to say, just start with the golden rule. So we all learned that as kids, right? Treat others the way that you would want to be treated. Great start. It acknowledges diversity. You're recognizing that there are other people. It's a nod to inclusion. Treat them the way that you would want to be treated. But it actually only gets you to tolerance because you're assuming everyone wants to be treated the way you do. So I say belonging starts with the golden rule, and then you got to like plus it up a notch with equity. Ask someone how they prefer to be treated, and then treat them that way. Right? So that is really diversity, inclusion, and equity together to create belonging. So how do you start to foster more belonging at work? And again, remember, getting there, shifting the culture in a sustainable way is really about everyone embracing these principles in mind through their daily interactions with others and daily decision making. And so I want you to just sort of like, how do you be that leader that can do that, and leader no matter where you are in the organization? There's just really three things to keep in mind. Being an inclusive leader to contribute to belonging means that you're being more conscious and self-aware. You're being more curious, and you're being more committed to this effort. So I'm going to break down each one of these. So being conscious first starts, again, by recognizing we all contribute to the workplace culture simply by showing up. We contribute in intentional ways, and we also contribute in unintentional ways. We should just be more aware of the unintentional things we're doing that may not help belonging. And that's where unconscious bias comes into play, right? So you've probably heard of unconscious bias, which refers to attitudes and beliefs that influence our actions and our decisions that are done unconsciously, right? Having unconscious bias does not make us bad. It just makes us human. It is our brain's natural way of helping us out so that we can actually function throughout the day, and it shortens our time for reaction because otherwise we would be crushed under all the information that we're bombarded with. You know, our brains are processing so much information per day. They only process a certain portion consciously. The rest is processed unconsciously, which means that when we receive information, we quickly ascribe meaning, positive or negative, not based on full information, full facts, but based on whatever our brains can retrieve from prior experience or from messages that have seeped into us over the years from other people or from media. So it's not always, our reaction is not always based on full and accurate facts. And two common ways that unconscious bias plays out unintentionally at work that are not helpful to a culture of belonging are affinity bias and confirmation bias. So affinity bias is our natural tendency as humans to gravitate towards people that we share something in common with. Or to have a more favorable impression towards others that we see something of ourselves in them. And that's natural because as humans, we like comfort, and familiar is always more comfortable. A typical example of how affinity bias might play out at work is you're interviewing someone, and interview is going okay, and then you find out you went to the same college, and all of a sudden, whoa, this person must be pretty smart. They went to the same college as me. Maybe they bump up a few notches on the candidate list. Not saying that having something in common with someone is not a reason to not hire anyone. It just shouldn't be the primary reason. And a lot of times, with affinity bias, without us knowing it, we end up mistaking comfort for competence. We hire the people, we promote the people, because we think they're the smartest and the best, simply because we feel more comfortable with them. If that makes sense. We don't want to mistake comfort with competence. Confirmation bias happens a lot because that's when we go out of our way to seek information, pay more attention to information, put more import on information that confirms what we already believe. And this happens a lot because as humans, we like to be right. So you just want to be aware and honest with yourselves that this happens a lot in the workplace. And it can, the end result could be other people who are not like you don't feel that sense of belonging. They feel more tolerated. And it also means that you end up staying in your safety zone, right? Which inevitably means that you are not going to embrace diversity as an asset, because diversity means different, and different has a degree of discomfort. Time to internalize. So turn back to the person that you were just chatting with, and just reflect on a time when you felt an immediate connection with, or had a strong preference for someone. How might affinity bias have influenced your behavior? All right, 1 minute. Okay, again, apologies for cutting the conversation short. Please, please, please do continue during the break. So in full disclosure, I had an affinity bias moment this morning. I was sitting and listening to the very first panel discussion with the 3 women, and I was very interested and engaged. One of the women mentioned where she went to college, and I was like, oh my God, me too. And all of a sudden I was like, she was my favorite. I had to seek her out during lunch. But I mean, that's fine. It's just that it can lead to missed opportunities, because I then wasn't as motivated to talk to the other 2 panelists and the knowledge, the information, the friendships that I might have missed out on, right? So just be a little bit more self-aware. All right, so now that we're self-aware that we all can fall victim to affinity bias, confirmation bias, what are we supposed to do about it so that those biases don't sort of hijack our decision making? Practice being more curious. So curiosity is the antidote to biases. And so I'm just going to give you 4 tips that curious-minded leaders apply in their day-to-day. So the first one is be intentional about seeking information from different sources, right? So be thoughtful about, who are your typical go-to people for advice? Who are your thought partners? How can you mix that up a little bit? Approach someone else to get input from a different lens. Curious people listen without judgment. They are more focused on the message than the messenger. It just helps you to be more receptive to what you're hearing. Curious people seek to understand, not to agree. They don't confuse the 2, right? You can listen to something and vehemently disagree with it. You can, not buy into or believe what someone is telling you, but there's always something to learn. Even if it's just, other people think this way, good to know. That's something to learn. And then last, you got to be humble, right? Be willing to be wrong. When you're responsible for achieving big things, I always like to say no one person has the monopoly on the truth. They just don't. So we have to be open to other ways of getting things done, live to solve problems instead of being right. So just practice being curious. All right, so time to practice. So we all have the opportunity to bring in different perspectives and ideas to round out our decision making, to make better decisions. So I just want you to just reflect on what is a challenge or an opportunity that you're currently facing in your personal or professional life that could benefit from considering more diverse perspectives or broader ideas. Okay, just 1 minute. Go ahead, talk amongst yourselves. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll ask us to come back together. You're so kind. I see you guys keep coming up and moving. I'm making you get your exercise. All right, that was the last one, so you can just sit and relax in your chair now. Okay, so the last C of being an inclusive leader is just to be committed to trying. None of this is particularly hard. The hardest thing is just remembering to put some of this into practice because we all get busy at work and we get in our zone and we get into execution mode and we don't lift our heads up. And so the only way that you'll do this is if you have a personal why that thinking a little bit differently, embracing this as a mindset matters to you. So all meaningful action starts with mindset first. So just reflect on, like, why does diversity, equity, inclusion matter to you personally, right? How does it align with the type of leader that you really want to be? Maybe the legacy or the impact that you want to have. How can you benefit personally from contributing to a culture of belonging? How does your work benefit? And how do the people that you care about benefit? I was at the beginning part of the awards ceremony right after lunch, and the first recipient that was introduced, and the person was describing their character, it was very much aligned with these principles, and the person was really leading these principles by example. And so I think, you know, you only do that, you only put forth the discretionary effort, and it's really small, little discretionary effort, so easy to get overlooked. You only do that if it matters to you and if it becomes just part of how you engage and interact with everybody in your decision. So just give that some thought, right? And I actually say, give these questions some thought and write your DEI why. Like, write it out on a piece of paper and stick it somewhere on your laptop or on your wall or on your desk as a reminder every time you interact or do something, sort of catch yourself, right? How are my biases or assumptions coming forward? Am I reverting back to my comfort zone? Could I do more to step out and engage people and bring people in? So I like to say an easy way to remind yourself to do that is through everyday acts of inclusion and taking advantage of meetings, right? So the way to shift the culture is to influence all the tiny little micro moments that add up over the course of the day, the week, the year, right? That's how actually business gets done. That's how innovation blossoms. It's through just these tiny little conversations that add up. And so much of that happens in meetings. So the average person spends between 35 to 50% of their workday in meetings, which sounds horrible, but it's also an opportunity because use that meeting as a reminder or a prompt. Be more conscious, be more curious, right? And so Each meeting, you've got 3 opportunities to do that. There's what you do before the meeting, there's what you do when you're in the meeting, and there's what you can do after the meeting. So every time before you as a meeting is coming up on your calendar, think, how can I be more conscious, more curious before, during, and after my meeting? And next thing you know, it becomes a habit. If you can get everybody in the workplace to do it, that's how you transform the culture. Tiny little actions influence those little micro moments that add up over time. So here are just like 3 examples. There's a million ways that you can be more conscious and curious and bring that DEI mindset into your meetings. But here's just 3 examples, right? So before the meeting, again, check in. Who are new thought partners? Based on the agenda, what we want to accomplish or discuss, who can bring a lens or a perspective that we don't have that could be interesting and really prompt us to think differently? Invite them to the meeting. Why do you have to stick with just the same old people? During the meeting, really create a culture and environment where all ideas are welcome, right? So try just practicing asking, what do you think, more often? And be sure to listen and seek to understand, even when you don't agree. And then after the meeting, this seldom happens, but I think it's huge. After the meeting, it's like life goes on, we got to get to the next thing. Why don't you spend 30 seconds to tell someone what you learned from them in the meeting or how they uniquely contributed? That's huge in terms of creating a culture of belonging and increasing engagement. Didn't cost any money, took maybe 30 seconds, but the impact is major. So these are just 3 examples that I give you to think about, but use meetings as a prompt. Now that you have this awareness, don't you dare go to a meeting without thinking about, oh yeah, that woman on stage, she told me to be more conscious and be more curious. And so I just want you to think about, and actually, maybe if anybody wants to share during Q&A, which we'll transition to now, one new idea that you'd be excited to implement at work that helps you to be more conscious and more curious. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and open it up for a little bit of Q&A before I just wrap up. So, any questions? Or does anyone want to share maybe one new idea that you'd be excited to implement? Yes. Oh, yeah. You like steal my idea. I like that one. It's huge. And, like I said, I worked in corporate for so many years, and it just doesn't always happen. But I think that's just a small thing that can actually go a long way. And if it happens more often than not, that's really how you distinguish yourself as a leader, but also your culture as well. Yes? Yeah, so the question was, during the pandemic, and we're doing things more remote and virtually, what impact has that had on DEI, and has it maybe hurt the opportunity to really foster DEI? I think it goes both ways, but I always say use what you got to the best advantage, right? And so some of the things that I've seen technology that has been able to do now that we've embraced it a little bit more, is build stronger connections across organizations that have been dispersed geographically, right? Because a lot of times people would say, well, we're not in the office anymore. We don't have the opportunity to build those relationships by dropping by the water cooler. That may be true. But if you have people who were not in the same geographic location anyway, now you can sort of do your virtual coffees or just be intentional and creative about it. So take advantage of the fact that we have to do things differently. So I think it can go both ways. Another thing that I actually started doing with my teams was, again, how do we do something that breaks out of the usual mode of happy hours? And Airbnb has a ton of online experiences that have been amazing, where you can transport yourself to another country, and someone who lives in that country literally takes you and walks you around via video. So I've taken my teams on trips to Italy and South Africa virtually, and we started doing that as team building instead of the happy hour because we couldn't gather in person. So take advantage of it. So I think, again, with intentionality and creativity, we can make the best of things. But there is also, we have to be realistic in-person engagement may be compromised for a while. What can we do in the interim? Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if you might comment a little bit on what we call each other. So I'm in an academic institution, and oftentimes there'll be meetings that have faculty and staff, and it's always Dr. X and Ann. You know, there's a setup and inequity, I think, and a lack of inclusion just by the titles that are used. You know, people are trying to be respectful, I guess, but
Yeah.
the downside of that is feeling like one person is more important than another.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have a specific answer on how to address that, but I will say you should take an inclusive approach to problem solving that, and then bring people together to say our ultimate goal is to help everybody feel valued and respected, right? So that they can contribute, and that's going to make all of us succeed. And sometimes how we address people can interject status and hierarchy that isn't necessarily helpful in that regard. How could we address this? How could we invite ideas onto the table? Sometimes the process of doing that is actually just as important as the outcome. I work with a lot of clients on, you know, they're like, we need to solve for our come back to work policy. What is that going to be now that some people want to work virtually, but we want them in the office? Like, what's the solution? And I said, I don't know. Probably there's no one perfect solution, but what you need to do is take an inclusive approach to solving the problem, right? Because through that process, you're creating belonging. You're letting people know that you actually care about what they think. You're inviting them to contribute. No one solution is going to be, not everybody's going to be happy with everything. I think in your situation, not everybody's going to be happy. But at least people can say the process enabled the conversation and it felt more inclusive than not. Sometimes we can win on the process even if we can't win on the outcome.
So I'll take a stab at answering your question. So one of the reasons I actually came here and I thought that BioForward is perhaps a good vehicle for is I've always been interested in community outreach and especially in science. Everybody talks about STEM and getting kids into that, but I haven't seen a lot of companies, and even my company, working well to reach into schools, do internships, things like that. So I'm interested in building that in our company and honestly as a community. So I don't know if afterwards, if anybody has good ideas, I would love to hear it. But I think it kind of does address more than just the boxes of diversity that you're talking about, but like, you know, because I'm a white guy, so I don't usually count in DEI in my mind, but I do have all these other different things, and so I think it would be really cool to work together in raising up the next generation.
Absolutely, and white guys have a very important role in diversity, equity, inclusion because you are more than the wrapper that you come in, and this is an all hands on deck. And I do think that, you know, again, with a lot of the companies I work with, they're led by white men and they kind of feel like they just don't have the confidence or the experience to weigh in. And none of us are experts in this. You know, it's impossible to be an expert in all dimensions of diversity. You're setting yourself up for failure. But what you can do is become more skilled in the way that you engage and approach across diversity and differences. And that's a skill set that everybody can lead by example, even white men. So I think this work requires everybody, all hands on deck. I just want to be mindful of the time. Okay, so if you have more questions, I'll still be here and I'm going to wrap up. So those of you who were brave enough to share and answer questions, I have parting gifts for you. So again, remember I said the hardest thing about this is just keeping this top of mind. So I have these idea books, these flip books that have 50 D&I questions that you can use with your colleagues. They're fun to get to know people beneath the surface, and then 50 everyday acts of inclusion ideas that you can integrate into your meetings to foster more of a sense of belonging. So I've got some for those of you who spoke, and I actually have a couple of extras, anybody who really wants some. So please come see me and grab one of your flip books. And I hope that you took away some easy, practical things that you can take back into your workplace and be that leader that fosters that type of environment that's going to help you to think big and act big. Have a great rest of your summit.